The year is 180 AT. The great Han Dynasty of China, a titan that has stood for 4 centuries and is sick. Its borders are fraying, its people are starving, and its government is drowning in corruption. It's an empire on the brink of collapse. But inside the gilded cage of the Forbidden City, the emperor isn't worried about any of that. He's far too busy with his latest, most bizarre passion project. Forget war councils or policy debates. Along the pristine waterways of the Imperial Garden, Sri, a bustling market is underway. The merchants are the most beautiful concubines in the land, and the star customer wandering through the stalls in a commoner's disguise, gleefully haggling over the price of silk and wine, is the emperor himself. This is Emperor Ling, a man who possessed a harem of thousands and wealth beyond comprehension. A man who could have anything or anyone with a single lazy command. So why this elaborate, humiliating charade? Why would the Son of Heaven, the most powerful man in the known world, pretend to be a commoner, buying trinkets he already owned from women who were already his property? What could he possibly be shopping for that he didn't already possess? The answer reveals a curse far stranger than any ghost. It's a sickness born not from desperation, but from absolute, soul-crushing abundance. Welcome to Cursed Chambers, where we find that sometimes the most depraved acts in history are just a desperate attempt to feel something, anything at all. To understand Emperor Ling's bizarre palace market, you first have to understand the world that made him possible. You can't diagnose the patient without first looking at the environment that made him sick. So let's set the scene. We're in the late 2nd century AD, the final sputtering decades of the Eastern Han Dynasty. For nearly 400 years, this empire had been a titan of civilization, a contemporary and rival to the Roman Empire at its peak. It was built on a sophisticated Confucian ideal, a pact between the heavens and humanity. The ruler, the Son of Heaven, was expected to be a benevolent, morally upright shepherd to his people. In return for his just rule, he would receive the mandate of heaven, the divine right to govern. But this mandate wasn't a lifetime subscription. It could be revoked. And by Emperor Ling's time, heaven was clearly trying to cancel its plan. The historical records from this era are grim. They speak of colossal floods along the Yellow River that swept away entire communities, followed by withering droughts that turned fertile plains into dust bowls. Famine led to plagues, and plagues led to a pervasive sense of despair. To the people of Han China, these weren't just unfortunate weather patterns. They were cosmic warnings. They were signs that the emperor had failed in his sacred duty, that the dynasty's moral authority was bankrupt. Basically, the divine approval rating for the Han Dynasty was plummeting, and heaven was doing a very public press release about it through a series of natural disasters. So who was in charge during this unfolding crisis? The answer lies with 2 key groups who defined the era. First, let's talk about the eunuchs. In the Han court, eunuchs were far more than just servants. They were a political institution. Their unique status meant they were the only adult males permitted in the private inner palace, giving them unparalleled 24/7 access to the emperor. They were the gatekeepers of information, the schedulers of meetings, the whisperers in the imperial ear. They weren't just advisors, they were the operating system the emperor was running on. And by Ling's reign, that OS was riddled with malware. A powerful group known as the 10 Attendants had achieved total administrative control. They had the emperor completely sandboxed from reality. His favorite eunuchs were so close to him that he called them father and mother, a level of workplace intimacy that would give any modern HR department a collective aneurysm. This brings us to our main character, Emperor Ling himself. Ling wasn't a tyrant in the classic sense. He wasn't a military conqueror or a political mastermind. He was essentially the Nepo baby, to end all Nepo babies chosen from a minor branch of the royal family as a teenager precisely because he had the political spine of a chocolate eclair, making him perfectly controllable. His job wasn't to lead an empire. His job was to be the face of the brand while the board of directors, the eunuchs, liquidated the company's assets. He had little interest in the tedious work of governing. Reports of famine in a distant province were to him the equivalent of a boring quarterly report he had no intention of reading. He was far more interested in his personal project's architecture, art, and finding new and inventive ways to amuse himself. He outsourced the entire tiresome affair of running the country to his eunuch parents, with one simple condition: keep the cash flowing. And that condition created the central rule of the game in his court, the policy that would become the dynasty's fatal flaw: pay-to-win governance. To fund the emperor's lavish lifestyle and their own bottomless greed, the eunuchs established a formal system for selling government posts. This wasn't just backroom corruption, it was official state policy. They created a price list. The governorship of a province control over millions of souls could be yours for a hefty fee. It turned the entire civil service into a multi-level marketing scheme where the only product being sold was human misery. And let's be clear about what this product looked like on the ground. When a man pays a fortune to become a governor, he's not there to build infrastructure or administer justice. He's there to get a return on his investment. This unleashed a predatory class of officials across the empire. They imposed crippling taxes on a peasantry already reeling from famine. Historical accounts tell of families forced to sell their children into servitude to pay off government debts. Farmers who couldn't pay had their ancestral lands seized, turning them into desperate refugees. This brutal economic cycle, born directly from the emperor's need for cash, stripped the social fabric of the countryside bare and pushed millions of ordinary people to a breaking point. It left them with only two choices: starve quietly or pick up a weapon and fight back. So this is the world we're in, a once great empire teetering on the edge of collapse, a divine mandate in tatters, a government run by a corrupt clique of eunuchs, and an emperor who is utterly divorced from the consequences of his own policies. It is a system primed for disaster. The only thing missing was a final decisive push over the edge, and Emperor Ling, with his palace of pleasures, was about to provide exactly that. So we have our setting: a once great empire teetering on the brink of chaos, run by a cabal of corrupt eunuchs and presided over by a detached emperor who would rather be anywhere else than the throne room. This is the point in the story where a competent ruler would have rolled up his sleeves, purged the court, and started the long, arduous process of fixing the broken system. Emperor Ling did none of that. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and started his passion projects. The story of his reign isn't one of great battles or political reforms. It's the story of a man retreating ever deeper into a private fantasy world. Of his own creation, a world funded by the slow-motion destruction of his own empire. This is what happened when the Son of Heaven decided to stop governing and start playing. Before Emperor Ling could build his personal Disneyland, he needed cash, lots of it. And his solution was the policy we discussed: the open sale of government offices. But to truly appreciate the cynicism of it, you have to understand that this wasn't just a policy. It was a full-blown retail operation, headquartered in the Emperor's West Garden. Imagine the scene. A nobleman from a wealthy provincial family travels to the capital. His cart's not filled with military supplies or tribute, but with heavy chests of coins. He isn't there for an audience about policy. He's there for a negotiation. He meets with one of the 10 attendants who acts as a sort of high-end, deeply corrupt real estate agent. They haggle. The eunuch might lament the high demand for the governorship of a prosperous province, driving up the price. The nobleman might plead poverty, offering a lower sum. It was, in essence, the business of the state being conducted like a back-alley deal. But here's where it gets truly beautifully twisted. The eunuchs developed a bizarre discount system. If a candidate was known throughout the empire as an honest, incorruptible official, a man of genuine Confucian virtue, they would be forced to pay the absolute full, non-negotiable price for the office. Why? Because the eunuchs knew a man like that would never use his position to extort the people, and therefore he was a bad investment for them. They couldn't rely on him for future kickbacks. However, if a candidate was a known scoundrel, a man famous for his greed and cruelty, they'd get a discount, sometimes up to a third off the asking price. They were a safe bet. The eunuchs knew this man would get to his new post and immediately start squeezing the populace for every last coin, making his money back in no time. and being more than happy to send a generous thank you gift back to his patrons at the palace. It was the most warped loyalty program in history, where your reward for being a decent human being was being charged more. This system wasn't just corrupt, it actively penalized integrity and subsidized villainy. It was the perfect engine for ensuring that only the worst people in the empire rose to the top. With the money from his pay-to-win government scheme pouring in, Emperor Ling finally had the budget to realize his true vision. And that vision was, in a word, decadent. He began an ambitious series of construction projects within the palace grounds. New soaring halls with jade inlays and elaborate carvings were built at immense cost. He commissioned thousands of rare trees to be brought from the far corners of the empire to create exotic new gardens. All of this while reports of famine and homelessness were piling up on desks just a few rooms away. But those were boring administrative details. The emperor was busy with aesthetics. His first major project was a building known as the Hall for Naked Swimming. The name is quite literal. He had a massive, luxurious pool built and ordered that when he went for a swim, his chosen female companions must all join him completely unclothed. The waterways around it were allegedly filled with a special type of seaweed that would wind around the swimmers' bodies as they moved. He commissioned special music composed just for these occasions to be played by an all-female orchestra. It was during this period that his obsession with controlling every detail of his fantasy world became apparent. He famously designed and then mandated a new article of clothing for the women of the palace, the kaidanku, or open-crotched pants. The stated reason was for convenience. A euphemism so thin it was practically transparent. It wasn't enough for him to possess these women. He had to curate their entire existence, right down to the clothes they wore. He wasn't just an emperor. He was a micromanaging creative director with an unlimited budget and deeply questionable taste. He wasn't just indulging his desires. He was building a living art installation where every element, every person was arranged for his personal amusement, and his greatest installation was yet to come. This is where all of Emperor Ling's obsessions, money control, and performance coalesced into his magnum opus, the palace market. He ordered a section of the Imperial garden to be transformed into a replica of a real-life city market. He commanded his concubines, women who had spent their lives learning music, poetry, and courtly etiquette, to become street vendors and shopkeepers. They set up stalls along the palace waterways, selling expensive silks, jewelry, and imported goods from the palace treasury. Others were tasked with being the customers, wandering from stall to stall. And the emperor himself, the son of heaven, would shed his dragon robes for the humble costume of a traveling merchant. He would wander through his own fantasy, haggling ferociously with his own concubines over the price of his own goods. Witnesses reported that these were not quiet, polite performances. The women were encouraged to be loud, to argue, to try and cheat each other, to mimic the chaos of a real marketplace. The emperor would get into shouting matches, delighting in the performance of it all. It was the ultimate escape. He had created a world where he could shed the crushing weight of his divine identity and pretend to be a common man, all without ever leaving the safety and luxury of the palace walls. And after a long day of playing shopkeeper, there was the after party. This took place in another specially built courtyard, which was given the notorious name, the Dog Kennels. Here, the pretense of the market was dropped and pure, unrestrained hedonism took over. With the emperor leading the way, he and his chosen companions from the market, all still wearing their conveniently designed pants, would engage in what was described as chaotic, animalistic revelry. It was a scene designed to cast off the final vestiges of imperial decorum and embrace pure impulse. It was the fire festival of imperial debauchery, brilliantly marketed to its one attendee, logistically a nightmare for everyone else, and morally bankrupt from top to bottom. For the emperor, this was the pinnacle. He had succeeded in building a perfect self-contained feedback loop of fantasy. He used the money he got from selling his real empire to fund a fake marketplace, where he could pretend to be a commoner before retreating into a private world where there were no rules at all. While the emperor was lost in his cosplay, the real world was burning. The consequences of his pay-to-win government were reaching a boiling point. The suffering he had ignored for so long was coalescing into a movement. Across the eastern provinces, a charismatic faith healer named Zhang Jue was gathering followers. He spoke of a new age, a new heaven. He gave the desperate peasants something they hadn't had in years, hope, and he gave them a symbol to rally around a simple piece of yellow cloth, a yellow turban. The final bill for the emperor's theme park was about to come due, and it would be paid in blood. So we have the story, a bizarre, almost comical narrative of a man who treated his empire like a personal bank account and his palace like a theme park. We have the what, the when, and the where. But the real work of this channel, the part that matters always, comes down to one question. Why? Why build the market? Why mandate the strange clothes? Why retreat into a world of make-believe while the real world was screaming in agony? Was Emperor Ling just a one-dimensional villain, a greedy, perverted fool who stumbled into power? That's the easy answer. It's the one written by the Confucian historians who came after him, eager to paint the fall of a dynasty as the result of a single bad man. It's a neat, tidy explanation that requires no further thought. But here in the chamber, we don't do easy. The truth is rarely that simple or satisfying. To understand the why, we need to move beyond the caricature and look at the complex machinery of power psychology and circumstance that created this man. Let's open the case file. Our first exhibit is a paradox. We think of an emperor as the freest person on earth, but in many ways, he was the ultimate prisoner. From the moment he ascended the throne, Emperor Ling's life was not his own. It was a suffocating performance of endless, mind-numbing rituals. Every hour of his day was scheduled. Every meal he ate, every robe he wore, every step he took was dictated by centuries of tradition and astrological prediction. He was surrounded by people, but he could trust no one. Every courtier, every general, every seemingly loyal official was part of a faction playing a long game for power. One wrong move, one moment of perceived weakness, and he could face a coup or a quiet dose of poison in his wine. His life wasn't his own. It was a high-wire act with the highest stakes imaginable. One bad review, and you don't just get canceled on social media. You get a dagger in the ribs. Viewed through this lens, his bizarre palace projects start to look less like acts of freedom and more like acts of desperation. The real world was a place where he had immense responsibility, but very little personal agency. Every decision was filtered through the scheming eunuchs. Every public appearance was a scripted piece of theater. So he did what any creatively frustrated person with an infinite budget might do. He built his own indie project in the backyard. The palace market was a world he could control utterly. He wrote the script, he cast the actors. He was the star. In his fake market, he could finally experience something that was impossible for him in the real world. An unscripted interaction, a moment of spontaneity, even if it was all an illusion he himself had paid for. It wasn't an escape to pleasure. It was an escape from powerlessness. Now let's look at his most infamous policy-selling government jobs. On the surface, it seems like pure, idiotic greed. But if you dig deeper, you can find a sliver of warped political logic. The greatest long-term threat to any emperor wasn't the peasants. It was the powerful, entrenched aristocratic clans who had dominated the government for generations. These old money families had their own power bases in the provinces, their own loyalties, and they often saw the emperor as a mere figurehead. The sale of offices, as disastrous as it was, served one secret purpose. It was a wrecking ball to that old establishment. It allowed the emperor and his eunuchs to bypass the traditional power structures entirely. It created a new class of officials who owed their loyalty not to their ancient family name, but to the man and the eunuchs who had sold them their job. It was a way to centralize power and wealth directly into the palace, cutting out the aristocratic middlemen. It was, of course, a catastrophically short-sighted solution. It was like deciding to burn down your house to get rid of a termite problem. But it wasn't mindless. Similarly, the palace market wasn't just a game. It was also a form of micromanagement. By creating a central hub for all luxury goods within the palace, Ling could personally oversee the flow of wealth, tracking the silks, pearls, and imported treasures that were constantly being lost or siphoned off by layers of thieving officials and servants. It was like a CEO tired of his department heads embezzling funds, deciding to personally manage the company's entire inventory from a pop-up shop in the lobby. A terrible business strategy, but you can almost see the paranoid logic behind it. This brings us to our final and most important exhibit. This is the psychological core of the story. We need to talk about the curse of having everything. For most of human history, our lives have been defined by desire, by striving. We want food, we want shelter, we want status, we want love. This wanting, this striving is what gives life meaning and direction. Now imagine a person for whom that entire mechanism is broken. Imagine being Emperor Ling. If you are hungry, 1,000 dishes appear before you before you've even fully formed the thought. If you feel a flicker of lust, 1,000 beautiful women are presented for your choosing. If you want a new building, thousands of men are conscripted to build it. Every single desire is gratified instantly and without effort. After a while, what happens? The desires themselves begin to feel hollow. The food loses its taste. The pleasures become repetitive. The power becomes a crushing bore. This is the sickness of ultimate privilege. It's a state of profound, soul-deep boredom. Emperor Ling's increasingly bizarre behavior can be seen as a frantic search for any authentic feeling. He mandated the strange, convenient pants, not just for physical access, but because it was new. It was a way to break the monotony. The palace market wasn't about the goods. It was about the thrill of the performance, the LARP of a normal life. The dog kennels wasn't just about hedonism. It was about smashing every last rule of decorum, about feeling something primal and chaotic in a life that was suffocatingly sterile. He was like a jaded adrenaline junkie, needing more and more extreme stunts just to feel a flicker of the original rush. So we peel back the layers, yet we move past the one-dimensional caricature of the evil, perverted king. We see the political prisoner, the paranoid micromanager, the psychologically tormented man drowning in his own privilege. And now, we can finally see the true nature of the curse. The cursed chamber Emperor Ling inhabited wasn't a physical room in the palace. It was the void of absolute power. It's a psychological prison where infinite choice leads to a paralysis of meaning. It's a state where having everything means that nothing has value. It's a torment born not of deprivation, but of obscene abundance. This void creates a desperate hunger for anything real, anything authentic, anything that can break through the sterile perfection of palace life. Emperor Ling wasn't a monster who destroyed his empire for fun. He was a casualty of this curse. He was a man with a bottomless emptiness inside him, and he tried to fill that internal void by creating a world of external chaos and fantasy. But the void was infinite, and the cost of trying to fill it would be the future of his empire. So after peeling back the layers of propaganda, politics, and psychology, what are we left with? Who was Emperor Ling? The final verdict is that he was not the one-dimensional monster that history often remembers him as. He was something far more complex and perhaps more tragic. He was not the architect of the Han Dynasty's collapse, but rather its most prominent symptom, a product of a system that was already diseased. He was a man born into a golden prison, granted infinite power, but stripped of any real agency or purpose. The bizarre, decadent world he built within the palace walls was not a celebration of his freedom, but a desperate monument to his imprisonment. The cursed chamber he inhabited was the profound, soul-crushing emptiness that comes from having everything, and therefore wanting nothing. His life was a frantic, failed attempt to fill that internal void, one pleasure, one game, one fantasy at a time. He wasn't a master villain. He was a bored child playing with matches in a house soaked in gasoline, and the whole empire was about to pay the price for his games. While Emperor Ling was lost in his cosplay as a common merchant, the real commoners of his empire had reached their breaking point. The suffering inflicted by the corrupt officials who had bought their posts from the emperor finally ignited a firestorm. In the year 184 AD, the Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted. Led by the charismatic faith healer Zhang Jue, hundreds of thousands of desperate peasants rose up against the Han government. It was a tidal wave of fury born from decades of famine, extortion, and neglect. They wore yellow scarves on their heads, believing they were the agents of a new yellow heaven that would replace the corrupt red heaven of the Han. For a time, it seemed like they might succeed. The rebellion spread like wildfire across the northern plains, overwhelming the disorganized imperial armies. Emperor Ling was finally rudely shaken from his fantasy. The crisis was too big for even the eunuchs to hide from him. Panicked, the court was forced to grant immense military power to a new class of men, ambitious generals, and regional governors to crush the rebellion. And while they did eventually succeed in putting down the yellow turbans in doing so, they sealed the fate of the dynasty. The act of crushing the rebellion shattered the last remnants of central authority. Power no longer resided with the emperor in his palace. It now belonged to the men with the armies. These were the warlords whose names would become legendary in the coming decades. Men like the brilliant and ruthless Cao Cao, the ambitious Yuan Shao, and the future founders of the Three Kingdoms. They had been given the keys to the kingdom, and they had no intention of ever giving them back. Emperor Ling died just a few years later in 189 AD. His death created a power vacuum that immediately exploded into open civil war. The warlords he had empowered turned on each other on the eunuchs and on the throne itself. The capital Luoyang was sacked and burned. The grand palaces where Ling had played his games were reduced to smoldering rubble. This was the true legacy of his reign. His personal retreat into fantasy directly led to one of the most brutal and bloody periods in all of Chinese history, the Three Kingdoms period. The decades of incessant warfare that followed his death would lead to the deaths of millions, a demographic collapse so vast that it would take centuries for the population to recover. The unified empire of the Han, which had stood for 400 years, was gone, all because an emperor was bored. In the end, what is the lesson of Emperor Ling? We are left with a profound and uncomfortable irony. Here was a man who dedicated his entire life and the resources of a vast empire to the pursuit of personal happiness. Yet he seems to have been a deeply, desperately unhappy man. He had access to every pleasure imaginable, but he found meaning in none of them. His story is a cautionary tale about the nature of desire itself. It suggests that meaning in human life is not found in the endless gratification of our whims, but in the striving in having a purpose, a challenge to overcome a reason to care. Ling had no purpose beyond his own amusement, and so his amusement became a bottomless pit. He is remembered as one of China's bad last emperors, a symbol of moral decay. But the truth is more pathetic. He wasn't a great villain whose ambition burned the world. He was a small man overwhelmed by the scale of his own privilege. He inherited a world and chose to build a dollhouse instead. And the final tragic irony is that for all his efforts to escape the role of emperor, it is the only thing he is remembered for. His failure to be a king is his entire legacy. His life serves as a strange and potent reminder that a person can be surrounded by unimaginable wealth and thousands of people, yet be completely, utterly alone in a cursed chamber of their own making. What do you think? Was Emperor Ling a tragic figure or just a foolish one? Let us know your verdict in the comments. And if you want to unlock more of history's cursed chambers, be sure to subscribe. The past is waiting.